We interrupt this program for a special announcement. A man described as a homicidal maniac has escaped from the hospital for the criminally insane. He is 6'3" tall, 210 pounds, dark eyes, bald, and may be wearing a Santa Claus costume taken from a shop in Burley. All residents of the county are warned to be on the lookout for this man and to phone the police if they see him. We now continue our program of carols for Christmas Eve.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And this week we are talking about Tales from the Crypt, 1972.
Yep.
From Amicus Pictures.
Yes.
I can't believe I remember that. Pause the podcast. Do we...
Well, I mean...
While the podcast is paused, I want to remind people to chip in $5 at the Patreon.
Yeah, check out our Patreon and our Facebook page.
Yes.
Our Facebook page is hilarious, I promise.
And in the time...
It's two guys yelling at one another across the internet.
Yes. And in the... Okay, so have you thought about pause the podcast?
Well, I mean, there is a spoiler. Sorry,
I think there's 5 spoilers.
There are twists.
There's 6 spoilers.
There's plenty of twists. I mean, it's the nature of the...
Maybe 7 spoilers.
Yeah, so if you like twists, go watch it.
Yeah. So I think there are twists. Maybe they're... It's really hard to say, because some of these stories I've read dozens of times.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
But they're kind of... You know the twists are coming, and once you know what one twist is like... there's a certain tone of nastiness in the EC Comics stories that you know the twist is going to be some nasty thing. Sometimes you don't know what nasty thing it's going to be, but you know it's going to be real nasty. So if that's your thing, maybe pause the podcast, but I think you'll see the twist coming, and maybe the movie won't be too ruined for you. Anyway, even if
all right, so if you're dumb, pause the podcast.
Yeah.
Otherwise, go watch it.
Yeah.
After we're done. So, tell us about what EC Comics is.
Okay. Here we go. EC Comics. So, EC Comics was a company started in 1944, and it was called Educational Comics. EC
oh my
Comics.
God, I didn't know that. That's just so ridiculous.
It was started by a man named Max Gaines. Max Gaines was there at the very dawn of the comic book industry. He was one of the 3 or 4 men that got together and said, hey, why don't we fold the newspaper in half like 2 times and get this small format and reprint all the newspaper comics in there and sell it on newsstands, and invented... He was one of the guys that supposedly invented the comic book. Supposedly to mask bootlegging was the other side of the story that some people will include in that tale. Anyway, Max Gaines... it was called Funnies on Parade, that first comic that came out in 1933. He founded Educational Comics in 1944, and I think eventually... I'm not sure what he was doing, but finally, I think he was down to like one title, which was Picture Stories from the Bible. That was the one thing he was publishing.
I can't believe this is how EC Comics started.
Yeah. So then Max Gaines dies in a boating accident. And his son, Bill Gaines, takes over in 1947. And Bill Gaines is like, screw this. He renames the company Entertaining Comics and starts putting out a raft of crime comics. Right. And eventually these crime comics, I think there's like, I can't remember the titles of all of them, but they got up to around the 20s, and then some of them started getting like more horror stories in them. So, and those were becoming more popular, so he's like, we're going to rebrand these titles. So he took some of them like Tales from the Crypt and recalled it, it was like War Against Crime or something like that. Suddenly it was like in issue 22 was War Against Crime. Issue 23 comes out, it's called Crypt of Terror. Why? Apparently because there's a postage thing where if you started a new title, you had to pay like more in taxes or something, so it was better to just renumber the old titles.
Okay.
So they renumber their books, and suddenly they become super sellers. Hotcakes. These things are selling like crazy. So they've got 3 horror titles. Tales from the Crypt,
Yep.
Vault of Horror, and Haunt of Fear. They've got a couple of war titles, Frontline Combat and Two-Fisted Tales.
Two-Fisted Tales.
Yep. And they got a bunch of, like, I would say crime. They're not like the old crime comics. Like, they're not like war against crime. They're more like people committing crime, getting revenge.
So it's not people, it's not Dick Tracy solving crimes.
No, this is just people killing each other. Usually married couples. Like one murdering your spouse in some way and then trying to hide the body and not getting away with it. Whatever, that kind of stuff. So there were two of those shock suspense stories and crime suspense stories, I think. And the other important thing here is that they had, so this is, by early 1950s, around, I'd say 1950, 51, they had the best stable of artists at a single company there has ever been. There was Jack Davis, Harvey Kurtzman, Johnny Craig, Will Elder, Frank Frazetta, Graham Ingels. Graham Ingels is an interesting guy because he was like the ugliest. His art, and he did 3 of the stories we'll be covering today, was this kind of weird gross out. Like, people are so gross and everything is dingy and disgusting.
Right.
And yet somehow it was very claustrophobic and you couldn't look away from his stuff. But he wasn't like a master draftsman like the other guys were and have been considered, but he's kind of my favorite for just being so weird. And his stories usually didn't have much of a supernatural element in them. It was usually just mean people. And Jack Kamen, Bernie Krigstein, John Severin, Al Williamson, Wally Wood, Joe Orlando. Joe Orlando I wanted to bring up so we could ring the bell this week.
Alright, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ring it.
Okay. Joe Orlando was the artist on Tales of the Black Freighter.
Oh, okay.
So wait, yes, the first 9 issues. And then he, supposedly, the real Joe Orlando was an artist at EC Comics.
Okay.
He was a very fine draftsman. And in the world of Watchmen, the comics industry did not get shut down. We have to talk about that a bit. But basically, the government was boosting comics because there were superheroes in them.
Yeah.
So when the parents came after the comics, they were like, no. We got to protect these comics. And EC became a flourishing business. And DC... And also, pirate comics became a big deal in the universe of Watchmen.
In Watchmen, yeah.
So DC stole Joe Orlando away from EC Comics.
In the world of Watchmen.
In the world of Watchmen. And he was working on a title called Tales of the Black Freighter. And then he quit around issue 9 because he was having friction with the writer. And then a new artist came on who drew Maroon, which is the one, or what's it called? The Dead Man Chest one? The one that's featured in Watchmen.
Great.
So I did need to bring that up just for that.
Yeah, just so we could bring that up.
There's only one page of Watchmen which is not drawn by Dave Gibbons, and that one page is a page of Tales of the Black Freighter drawn by Joe Orlando, the actual Joe Orlando.
Oh wow, he actually drew it.
He actually drew it. Yeah.
That's rad.
So the main, the main flavor of these stories. So you get an issue of EC Comics that would have 4 stories in it. They'd be 8 pages each, and they're usually about. They'd be about poetic justice, I guess you could say. One of the stories is even called Poetic Justice, but it's usually about somebody does a nasty thing and they get their comeuppance in not ironic way, the opposite of ironic, exactly the most fitting way. So like there's one where
comic.
Yeah.
They suffer their karma.
Yes, that's right. And the other thing is the horror ones were exceptionally gory, although rereading them this week, and I've reread these many times, but I really did notice that there's not actually that much gore on the page. Often you hear about it, and often it's the Crypt Keeper who will show up in the last panel. He's the horror host.
Yes.
Will show up and describe, and then he got ripped to pieces and his parts were thrown all over town or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's another variety which are called the Preachies, which showed up in the crime suspense and shock suspense stories, and these ones were more like what we would now call like social justice stories. So, but it would be the same kind of thing. Like this guy would be really anti-Semitic, and he would be going around town, like fires in Jewish homes and stuff like that. And at the end of the story, his doctor would show up and reveal that he's actually half Jewish or something like that.
Yeah. they're like moral tales, but
yes,
but grisly.
Yes, and absolutely, and the kind of thing that if you're 10 years old, you're hiding this from your parents, but you're trading them with your friends. There's got 4 stories. You're enjoying this for a full month, and then you're swapping them around, trying to read all of them.
People love these.
Yeah.
But what happened?
Well, they were selling very huge, and there are a lot of imitators were out there, and the imitators were sometimes gorier, even on the covers, and more explicit about it. And the parents are starting to get a bit worried. And finally this dude named Frederick Wortham, a...
Seduction of the Innocent.
Yeah, so he's a psychiatrist, or he claimed to be, or I don't know what he was. Child psychiatrist, I guess. He wrote a couple of articles in 1948 that appeared in a couple of magazines complaining about these kind of comics. He said they were corrupting the youth.
Yep.
And in 1954 he came out with this book, Seduction of the Innocent, which laid it all out and took all sorts of panels out of context. Batman and Robin in bed. That's like, oh, this is a gay couple. That's where that whole thing started up, was in this book. And there was a panel where he's like got somebody's like shoulder, and he's like, this looks like somebody's rear end, the way it's shaded, and this kind of stuff.
Hilarious.
Suddenly we've got a Senate subcommittee on corruption of morals of youth in America, and comic books are to blame, according to them.
Yep. And
Bill Gaines, who's been writing almost all the horror titles, and I mean, within the company, Harvey Kurtzman, who was handling the war comics, thought the horror comics were going too far. So even he was like, well, that's a, you know. So anyway, Bill Gaines goes up to testify, and supposedly he's on his diet pills and some other sort of medication, and he's not so coherent. I've heard different ways. Apparently, I also saw somebody said that the testimony was online on YouTube or something a few years ago. It's not there now. I looked for it. But they said, according to the thing I read, that he actually sounded okay. So
it's an urban legend, maybe, that he was on speed and ranting?
I don't know. I mean, he might have. I think he might have been on the uppers, but I don't. Maybe it didn't affect his testimonies. I think he himself said he was on. But anyway, people felt that this was kind of the final nail. So there had been a supervisory code, like a Hays Code for comics, but it was not obeyed. I can't remember what it's called. It was the CCA. I can't remember what it stood for, but it existed, and it was like, hey, we're gonna, not show things to be immoral, and things aren't going to be too gory, things like that. But nobody paid attention to this thing. But when this happened, Bill Gaines was like, okay, we got to protect ourselves. So he called a meeting of all the publishers. He said, right, let's put together a code that we have to follow this time, and that when the newsstands see that code, they'll know that it's safe to sell those titles. Well, all these guys that he had brought to this meeting went off, and they're like, they formed their own code. And a lot of people will say that they were specifically trying to put Bill Gaines out of business. Maybe true, maybe not. But there's a lot of things in there that are very specific. Like, you cannot have the word crypt in your magazine title. You cannot have the word horror in your magazine title. You cannot use the word Wolfman. And this is a funny thing, because when Marv Wolfman, the writer, who we've mentioned a few times on the show for whatever reason, was writing, I think it was House of Secrets for DC, there was a story in there where it was like, and now the Wolfman presents. And the Comics Code Authority came back and said, you can't put this in there because you've used the word Wolfman. And they're like, that's the name of the writer. And they said, if we put his name in the credits, can we say the Wolfman presents? They're like, yeah. That's how DC started putting credits on their horror titles, because of Marv Wolfman's name and passing the Comics Code.
Man, this is just an absolute font of trivia.
Okay, so basically this code comes out, and because of the code, EC is submitting their comics to the Comics Code Authority, and they're rejecting stories left and right because of these things. And also, even stories that they had printed a few years earlier, they're trying to reprint them, and now the code's saying no way. And for ridiculous reasons. Look up the story Judgment Day, or I'll post about it on the Facebook. It's notorious, because I guess I can talk about it. I've done 2 episodes about Easy Comics on deconstructing comics within the last 12 months. So I must say,
if the last 15 minutes hasn't been enough,
okay, but I will just sidetrack into Judgment Day, since we're talking about the Comics Code Authority. Right. Judgment Day is about this astronaut who goes to another planet, which is a colony of Earth, has been created as a colony by Earth, which is populated by robots. Okay, this astronaut comes out, he's got to wear his helmet the whole time because there's no atmosphere or whatever, it's just a robot planet. There's 2 types of robots, there's red robots and blue robots. And I think it's the Red Robots show him around. He's like, look at our awesome space cars. Or they want to become part of the Earth Federation. I think they were a fan of Earth, but they want to be in the Federation. Whatever. He's like, okay, yeah, that's a nice Earth guy. He's like, look at our awesome skyscrapers. He's, yeah, that's very nice. Can you take me to, like, where the Blue Robots are? And the Red Robots like, what? He's like, okay. And the Blue Robots are out there living in this dingy, they're working in dingy factories, and, like, they live in these slums. They're not allowed to ride on the bus in the same place the Red Robots are. And the astronauts are like, okay, I kind of see what's going on here. And they said, can I see the factory where they're all made? And they go to the factory, and all the robots are coming out of one factory.
Yep.
But some of them get red shells, and some of them get blue shells. Wow. And the astronaut says, look.
Subtle social commentary here.
Astronaut's like, look, you're not ready yet. And they're like, what? Why not? And he says, well, you know, you got to sort out this business with the blue robots. And he gets in his spaceship, and he takes off his helmet, and it's a black dude. And that's the last panel, and the caption says that the sweat on his forehead glistens like the stars.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. And they printed this once, and then when they wanted to reprint it, the CCA said, no, they said, you're not allowed. And he's like, why? And they said, no, you just can't print it. And then they're like, and they said, well, we're going to print it. Well, and then CCA says, well, at least take off the sweat. You have to remove the sweat from the guy's forehead. And so reportedly, Bill Gaines said, fuck you, and hung up the phone on this guy, and they ran the story anyway. The way he tells the story.
Because the Comics Code doesn't have any kind of enforcement, legally enforced power to actually stop someone.
No, exactly. But the newsstands can say it doesn't have the code stamp on it, which is this little thing that looks like a stamp.
It's a voluntary code.
Yes, yeah. And then you just don't. It's like getting an NC-17 rating on a movie. Theaters can choose; they just won't carry it if it's rated NC-17. So basically, this means the end of EC Comics, except for Mad Magazine, which survived by changing to becoming a magazine. Because that was not a comic book anymore. They were a comic for 20 issues or whatever, and then they became a magazine, then they were... that's how EC survived. And then EC was bought out completely by National, which became DC Comics. So DC is the current owners, as far as I know, unless something's changed the last couple of years, of EC Comics, which is basically only Mad Magazine, but... It's reprinted by, I've got a pile, this is like half of my EC, I had to bring out a second table today for recording, to put some of my EC Comics on.
Yeah.
But they're being reprinted. We've got like, Dark Horse is doing some reprints, Fantagraphics is reprinting like by artists, just by artists in black and white. The Dark Horse one is recolored, which is not my favorite. IDW is doing like original art reprints.
Wow.
They've found complete stories somehow or other. For a long time, there was a company called Gemstone or Gladstone that was reprinting them just like issue by issue.
Okay, well, look, the listeners can't see what you're showing me.
No, they can't see it, but it's just got a regular stapled comic book. So instead of getting like a big trade paperback, so they're still available in all sorts of formats.
Yes. Yeah, these are popular. People, I like these.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just read one every now and again, usually on the high seas. But, you know, like, because I think we've had this conversation many times. I sort of discovered them when I was at university in my in the fiction library on campus. And I used to love just reading them. They're just really, really cool. Like, really groovy.
Yes, and beautiful. Like, really the best,
great art,
best art, yeah.
And I just love that I understand why they were so popular, because they're really fun to read. You just get your 8 pages. There's something hair-raising usually happens.
Yes.
And someone suffers a righteous fate.
Yes.
It really tickles you in all the right places.
Yes, but I also want to point out that all these stories have a horror host. And
yes. People might be familiar with the format from if they've seen the TV show.
Right. Okay, so yes. So in the 90s we had this HBO show, Tales from the Crypt. I've never seen a single episode. But you probably know...
how unusual.
I know. Well, I didn't have HBO in where I lived. Well, it was a pay cable anyway. But there were videos at the video shop, but certainly you would see they were advertising everywhere, in comics especially, so I knew what the Crypt Keeper... I knew what he sounded like somehow.
Hello, kiddies!
Yes, exactly. Now, EC was not the first... So I thought, was EC the first company to do horror hosts? And I texted Stephen Bissett, and he set me very straight on this.
Did he? Great.
So there were horror hosts on radio first, and they were still on radio up until the 60s. Then there were a few before EC Comics, but EC Comics, it was every story had, it was either they were called the Ghoul Lunatics at EC, and there was the Crypt Keeper, the
old lady,
the Old Witch,
and
that's it. The Vault Keeper, the Old Witch, and the Crypt Keeper. Brilliant. We had 3 hosts. None of them looked quite like the skeletal figure that was in the HBO series.
The puppet. He's sort of like an animatronic puppet.
Really. Must have been a puppet, yeah. Yes, and then Vampira, it started out in California in 55, so that was after EC Comics.
Yes.
And then after that we had, all the others, which I can't remember the names of, but apparently Steven said there were even some regional ones at the same time as Vampira in California. Wow. Anyway, but what I was trying to get to was they're having a great time, these horror hosts. They introduce the stories. There's tons of terrible puns.
Yes.
But they're loving that they're terrible puns at the end of the story, where they talk about the comeuppance and they have all sorts of ridiculous... The punning is non-stop.
That's something I think people would know about the Crypt Keeper from the HBO series as well. He's famous for his puns.
Right. Okay. So that's a really key component of it, I think, especially when
they're gleeful.
Yes, exactly.
At start and finish. They're thrilled to bits to tell you about their latest tale of terror.
Yes.
And at the end they're like, wasn't that a... kick in the head or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. I love it.
Yeah.
I think we're pretty close. We're closing in on our record for most time before we actually talk about the comics that we're looking at. I think perhaps Dark Age of Comic Books with Bloodshot. We're probably is a contender.
Yeah,
but we're closing on it.
So last thing I just want to mention about the presentation of the stories is there's a lot of text caption narration boxes.
Yes.
This is because the format at EC was they would letter the stories before they sent them to the artist. So the captions would be there already and the artist would just draw around the text that was already... And they used Leroy lettering, which was this lettering set, so it wasn't hand lettered. Only the war titles by Kurtzman, because Kurtzman, again, he didn't like the Leroy lettering, so he actually hand lettered his books, so they look a bit more organic. So it gives you kind of a sense of what we're looking at here. No,
very good. Fantastic, Kumar. An absolute tour de force. I would just to reiterate, you can see why I was, I chuckled when you said that it was originally called Educational Comics, because it was at the center of this kind of
absolutely
moral panic in the 1950s?
50s, early 50s,
where everyone was it's sort of like an early version of this. This just happens over and over in history, doesn't it? I mean, you have a moral panic where the moral guardians worry about. We see it with DVD, D&D in the 80s. It's sort of like rap music or whatever in the 90s. It just happens over and over, doesn't it?
I think, but EC is a special case. I think because if you look at what's on TV, you're looking at Leave It to Beaver, Ozzing Hair. It's very wholesome post-war, everything is great, kind of this image they're trying to project of suburban America, and EC Comics was like, no. And especially Mad Magazine was every movie that's coming out, they're like, no, don't trust. Mad Magazine was saying, don't trust grown-ups. That was their number one message. Don't trust what they're trying to tell you. They're trying to tell you it's a good movie, it's not a good movie. Don't believe anything they're telling you about anything. It was cutting everything down. And I feel like the horror comics were the same. It's like all those happily married suburban, your Blondie and Dagwood couples were on TV, and in the comics it was like they were constantly they're miserable, they're trying to kill each other all the time.
So this is the subversive,
absolutely,
alternative side,
and you can see why it was so far away from what America was the image they were trying to project themselves. You could kind of see why the parents would be freaking out that this was out there.
So that's a different interpretation then, that it's very specific to the time period.
I think so. I don't see it as a rap music or the D&D.
Not just a recurring moral panic.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think, but I mean, we did get the labels on records because of that. But the 80s was another time.
Well, I'm just inclined to see an event like this in the broader context of historical fear of the youth, which has been happening since the ancient times, since the Roman era, really.
Yeah.
But I'm very pleased that you pulled me up and gave some extra context.
So this movie has 5 stories, so we've read 5 stories from 5 different issues.
Yes.
Now, the reason they've come from... They're not all from Tales from the Crypt. They're actually from Vault of Horror and Haunt of Fear as well.
I noticed that. Only 2 of them are from Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, and the reason is apparent. So some of the Tales from the Crypt stories were reprinted in the 60s with Frank Frazetta covers by Ballantine. And one was called Tales from the Crypt and one was called Vault of Horror.
Yep.
And somehow the producer got a hold of these two books
I
and
also
was like,
saw that.
I love these. And that's why they're called those. But the stories came from across the line.
Because we're talking about two movies here. This one, Tales from the Crypt, and there's a sequel of sorts.
Yeah.
Vault of Horror, which I believe we might be covering soon.
Well, I think we're definitely going to be covering it. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Maybe very soon. Right. Okay, so the first one is in All Through the House. As you can guess from the title, it's Christmas-themed one. This is written and drawn by Johnny Craig, Johnny Craig was one of the best clean line artists at EC, I would say. All his women tended to look like they should be starring in Hitchcock movies.
Right.
And he tended to write his own stories as well. I think he was mostly doing stuff over at Shock and crime suspense stories. But, okay, so this one is about a woman who kills her husband on Christmas.
She's killed him off panel at the very beginning.
Off panel, we see her standing. She's standing over the body. Right, basically. We hear a whomp. There's a whomp. There's a panel that's just the sound effect, which is whomp, and then she's standing over him, and she has killed him with with one of the fireplace poker, and he's dead. And she's totally gleeful about this because she's like, "Haha, Merry Christmas, Joseph. You're sleeping so peacefully, dreaming of Santa Claus." It's her lines, and when she's like cleaning up the mess and stuff, she's like singing Christmas carols and stuff. But she has a daughter upstairs in bed who's waiting for Santa to show up. So she has to go up. She has to run upstairs and like tell the daughter, just stay in bed. You have to go to sleep or Santa won't come. Now, she says she's planned this for. The caption tells us she's planned this for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't planned it very well, has she? Because her daughter's in the house.
Also, she's bought him a necktie, which is under the tree. So why did she buy him the necktie if she knew she was going to kill him that night? I don't know.
Why did... Yeah,
just put an empty box.
Why did she just hit him with the poker on Christmas Eve? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. But then she's like, okay, I got to get rid of the body. But first she decides to clean up some of the other stuff, put the poker away, etc. But then she hears a report on the radio.
Yes.
The radio says a lunatic has escaped from an asylum, a homicidal maniac.
Yes.
And this guy only kills women. He'll only kill men if he's confronted by them, and he won't kill little kids, but he's crazy about killing women.
He just wants to kill women.
He loves killing women. And
he's wearing...
He's wearing a Santa Claus suit. They announced on the radio, he's wearing a Santa Claus suit. And then they say, he's in Pleasantville. She's like, Pleasantville? This is Pleasantville. So she starts freaking out. She's like, oh my god, okay, so I gotta lock all the doors and windows. And she looks there's a knock at the door. She looks at the window, and there's a guy in a Santa suit. Now, normally in EC Comics story, you think, okay, it's actually a different guy in a Santa suit. That's not how this plays out. It's the guy. So she's like, okay, I gotta call the police. She's like, no, I can't call the police because she's got a dead body
on her living room floor.
So I don't know what she was planning to do with the body in the comic. I can't remember if they said, but she's like, okay, I gotta take it downstairs. So she starts moving the body. She's got to worry about her kid not waking up. She's got to worry about this Santa Claus that's homicidal.
She's frantically running around trying to do 10 things at once.
Absolutely paranoid, yes.
Yep. So she's boarding up the windows.
Johnny Craig did this story so many times in so many different ways where a person goes absolutely nuts with paranoia, which may or may not be justified. So she's boarding. She's literally hammering boards up over the windows, as you said. She finally goes up to check on her daughter. Daughter's not there.
Yep.
And she like runs downstairs, and she's like, "Where are you, Carol?" or whatever the girl's name is. And she runs downstairs, and the daughter is standing there
at the front door,
open front door,
holding the hand of a really goofy-looking serial killer.
Actually, I don't know if he's goofy looking, but I love the maniacal look on his face. I actually think it's really great.
I'm glad you liked it because I think he looks very silly. He's got a runnel of drool coming out the corner of his mouth.
He looks like Stephen King, actually, now that I'm looking at this closely. But he's like hunched over, and he's like got this grin on his face, like. And then the story was narrated by Santa Claus, but then Santa pulls off his mask and reveals it's actually the Vault Keeper. And the Vault Keeper tells us that, Carol's mommy, what did it say? Oh, I suppose you've been wondering just what I've got in the sack. So he's carrying Santa's sack. Only what's left of Carol's mommy after that maniac goes through with her. And by the way, Merry Christmas.
Classic.
Oh yeah, this Santa loved to slay bells, is what the Crypt Keeper tells us.
Oh God. This is all extremely typical. You don't have to read out any more of them because everyone's got the idea now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's anything else you wanted to add?
No, I don't know.
I do.
Just that I think that the serial killing Santa looks more goofy than scary.
So like the beard is like half hanging off him. I love the. I don't know. I love the. Like, you know what she's in for from that last panel. Now, also, why did we get a real motive for her killing the husband?
Nope.
Do you remember? Okay.
We never find out what the deal was.
That's important when we get to the movie.
Just that she doesn't seem like she doesn't seem like she's in distress. She, as you pointed out, she's very happy to have killed him. Ecstatic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than
very
relieved.
Pleased with herself.
Not relieved, pleased with herself.
Yeah.
Smug almost.
Yes.
So that we know she's a villain.
Yes, absolutely. So the next story we've got is Reflection of Death. This was actually in a Tales from the Crypt issue. This one is drawn by Al Feldstein, who had an oddball style, but he was the co-writer of most of these stories with Bill Gaines.
Okay.
And, this one has two guys who are driving back from...
I'm just wondering if I interrupt you for a minute.
Sure.
I love a lot of you've mentioned the way they end.
Yeah.
But I noticed, particularly with this one, there's a style where they add an exclamation mark to the end of every single sentence.
Yes. And
it makes them sound like they're breathlessly excited about what they're about to tell you.
And it seemed to be almost like... You know where else I noticed it? Jack Kirby's Fourth World.
Yes, yeah. Yeah,
I noticed.
There was a time. The gods died.
Yes, I read that. I remember I read that. I had that big omnibus that was like 1,200 pages, and I was probably 600 pages before I got to a full stop. Like it was all exclamation points.
I instantly thought of Jack Kirby's Fourth World as well when I was reading this. Welcome, dear fiends.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yes.
Come into the Crypt of Terror. I am your host, the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah. Yes.
It's like this, and it's not just the Crypt Keeper. Every caption is doing this too.
Yes, yes.
And when these guys are just sitting next to each other in a car, everything they say has exclamation marks. It's like they're screaming at one another.
Yes, yes.
Once you start noticing it, it's hard to stop.
Oh yeah, I didn't even really notice it. Maybe because I've read them too often. Because it's either that or ellipses, depending on what's going on. But
yes, there are no full stops.
Yes,
just exclamation marks and ellipses.
Yeah.
But you were saying.
Okay, so we've got two guys in a car. And they're driving back from a New Year's Eve party, I think. And
yes,
one guy.
The date is very important.
Yes, and one guy's like getting sleepy, so they switch drivers. And it's told in the second person. You're John Smith or whatever his name was.
Not common, but this is great.
Very rare. It happens a couple of times in EC Comics.
You are driving home.
Yes, and you switch seats.
You are driving home.
Yes. Yes. With the exclamation point. They have a crash. And he
sinks into a unusherable darkness.
Yes. Yes.
Time passes and then you wake.
Yes, you wake up.
You see the stars.
Now suddenly from this point on,
it's from we're seeing it
the drawings are in first person.
Yeah, it's so good.
So you're looking up at a tree and the
POV.
power lines, and then you're looking down at your feet and the car's nowhere to be seen. You're lying in the road. You stagger to your feet. You try to hail down a car. The car slows down, but then the driver sees you and screams and drives off. You try to stop a homeless guy under a bridge who's like just warming his hands by the fire.
He invites you to sit down and share his stew.
Yes,
but then
when you come out of the showers, when you come out of the shadows, and he gets a good look at you, he screams and runs away.
Get away from me, and then he runs away.
And then you
step on a newspaper.
You step on a newspaper.
But what's the date on it?
Yes.
It says February 17th.
Yes.
But that's not right. That's almost 2 months from now. You know it's January the 1st because you were driving home from a New Year's Eve party.
Yes. Tries to flag down another car. Another woman screams. He finally gets home to his house. It's boarded up. No trespassing sign.
It's been seized by the bank.
Seized. That's right. He's like, you're like, what? What is going on? This is bizarre. Foreclosed.
Of course.
Another guy in the street screams when he sees you. You go to ring the doorbell of the guy that was driving.
Yeah.
And
he's the only person that hasn't screamed at the side of you. And you say, it's me. It all spills out.
Yeah.
It's me, Al, because that's your name.
Yes.
You say everything. The accident, what's happened since then, how everyone's reacting, and your friend replies, this is not right. You know, you must be making fun of me. This must be a joke. Because everybody knows that Al and I were in a car accident 2 months ago. Al died and his was terribly mangled, and I, of course, went completely blind.
Yes.
And then he steps out of the shadows, and he looks creepy as heck.
Yeah, you walk toward the mirror, and then you finally see your own face, and it's all like decomposed.
Yeah, you're a zombie.
But then you wake up in the car. It's the night of the drive, and you were asleep. But then the exact same thing happens again. There's another crash. And then you fall into darkness again, and then we wake up in the first-person view again, the POV view, and then he, like, wanders towards the first car, and then there's the scream again.
And that's when you realise it's not a dream, this time it's real, you're dead for keeps.
Yeah.
But you're still up and wandering around.
Yes.
I absolutely love this. This is my favourite.
Yeah,
of the ones we've read,
I did feel like putting the dream on the end was a bit of putting a hat on a hat, and I'm not sure why.
I think it's important. Well, I don't know about important, but I love it.
Yes.
Because it's like a kind of like he's trapped.
Yes, that's right. It is trapped, and it actually really reminded me of the Thanks for the Ride lady.
Thanks for the Ride lady.
In Creepshow 2.
Right. No, you know what this reminded me of?
Yeah.
The Outsider by Lovecraft.
Oh, right.
So, again, famous short story about a character that doesn't know itself. Himself,
yeah, right.
Emerges, people are terrified.
Yes.
And then what leads to his terrible realization is his own reflection.
Yes.
And yeah, I absolutely love this story. It's genuinely spine-tingling.
Yeah. But I don't know, I don't know how many times I've read, some of these stories I hadn't read before. I'm not sure if I'd read this one before, but you know that he's all mangled up. And it's just a matter of you're waiting to see the face in the mirror. And it's actually, the face is revealed halfway down the page. Yeah. It's not even like a turn the page reveal. None of these are turn the page reveals. You have to be really careful reading AC Comic, because you're going to get the penultimate panel is going to be the surprise, and then the final panel is going to be the Crypt Keeper's goodbye. So you have to be careful to not try to scan down the page. But this one, it's like right in the middle, so it's almost not the shock.
Sure. I see what you... No, I mean, it's more just a sense of dread.
Yes.
A sense of building dread.
Yes.
And I think that's why the ending works, because it's not the reveal that he's actually a zombie all along. Because, I mean, we're reading EC Comics and we know that people are running in terror from him because he's a corpse.
Yes.
It's the fact that it was a premonition, and he's trapped in some kind of repeating loop where he's forever waking up as a corpse.
Right. Also, very important, there's no mention of why he's a zombie.
No,
he hasn't done any wrongdoing. There's no karmic thing in here.
You're right. No, you're right. There is no karmic thing in this one.
He just comes back.
Well, and it's not because it's us. I haven't done anything wrong.
Yes, that's right.
Maybe driving home drunk on New Year's Eve. Oh, that probably wasn't a crime in the 1950s.
Yeah, really interesting, that one.
Something which doesn't survive the transition to the film, where that character is no longer, first of all, an insert, an audience insert, but he's also a sinner.
Yes. We will get to it 100%. Okay, next story is Poetic Justice. This is the first of our Graham Ingels stories. The next serial Graham Ingels, which to me is very interesting, that the producer or writer that we latched on to the Graham Ingels stories. So this one is called Poetic Justice. It's about... So another interesting thing about these, this one was, I think Gaines and Feldstein came up with the titles first. I think they came up with like Poetic Justice, All Through the House, because she goes all through the house.
Oh, she does too.
And Blind Alleys, or Poetic Justice. This one is about poetry. I feel like they came up with the titles first, and they're like, how can we build a comeuppance story around this title?
That would
with some gore thrown in.
Not implausible.
So Poetic Justice is about this dust man, like a garbage man, who lives... He's friendly with all the neighborhood kids. He fixes up junk that he finds during his garbage collection, and he gives it to kids around Christmas. But meanwhile, across the street is this rich dude and his son. This old rich dude and his son. And they wish this eyesore of a property from across the road. If they wish they could get rid of him somehow.
Yeah, they don't like living next to a dustman.
Yeah.
And they don't like his old house.
Yes.
Which they believe to be full of vermin and rubbish.
Yes.
I mean, it's a bit dilapidated from the outside.
Yeah.
But they're convinced that it's filthy on the inside because he's a filthy garbage man.
Yes. So they start coming up with all sorts of schemes to make the town turn against him.
Yes.
Like they ruined the neighbor's rose bush.
He keeps dogs.
Yes.
So they ruin the neighbour's rose bushes so that the town, like, not just the neighbours, but everybody's in town, right?
Yes.
So that everyone will think his dog's digging up the roses, which leads to the dogs being taken away from him, which distresses him because he's a widower.
Yeah.
Completely alone. His wife died, predeceased him 10 years earlier or something.
Yeah.
He just has his dogs and the local children for company.
Yes. So
Then they start spreading rumours of disease and so on and so forth, or that he has unhealthy interest in the children.
Yes.
Is that in the comic or is that only in the film?
I think that might only be in the film, but they
Right.
definitely convinced the parents to like not let the kids hang out with him somehow or other, just by saying he's like it's a diseased filthy place or whatever. And then finally they're like, it's Valentine's Day, so it must be 2.5 months after the Christmas thing, so I'm guessing. And they're like, okay, we're gonna play a real mean prank on him. We're gonna send him a pile of Valentine's Day cards, but with all like nasty poems in them.
Yeah.
Saying like,
Some people live in the country, some people live in town. We just wish that you would jump in the river and drown.
yes. And finally, after all this, 2 months.
It's too much.
It's too much bullying, and he hangs himself. They wonder why he doesn't come out of his house for a while. They go over, they find that he's hung himself. And they also find that the place is actually spotless.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're like,
But they didn't want him to kill himself. They wanted him to leave town.
yes.
They wanted him to sell the house to them because it made him offers in the past, but he wanted to die in the house where he lived with his wife his whole life.
For all those years, yes. So he was very sentimentally attached to the house. So they bury him, and then a year later to the date, a corpse rises from the grave, his grave.
Again, there's no
explanation of how this. It's just, I guess in this case, it really is karmic. It's like the universe is making things right by bringing this corpse back.
Yeah.
Because he was so wronged unjustly.
And this is the corpse of the Dustman himself,
Yes, that's
who was
right.
mild-mannered in life, but as a zombie is bent on a gruesome revenge.
Yes.
He tears the heart from, I think, the father in the comic, and leaves a poetic note. You've got it in front of you.
Yeah, so I'm trying to look at it. So they're opening that year's Valentine's Day cards, and the zombie comes in and kills Harold.
Who's the father, I think? Or is it the son?
I think it's the son.
Okay.
And then in the morning, old Henry. Old
Okay.
Henry looked for Harold and couldn't find him, but in his room he found a neatly tied package. The card said, "A Valentine's Day greeting to Henry." He opened it, good Lord, and we see that his son's heart is in the...
Is there a poem in the comic?
No, it just says...
That's bizarre, because it's such an...
It just says, "A Valentine's greeting to Henry."
Well, okay. Alright, so that's just... That ticks me off, because, as you said, it's supposed to be about poetry, but poetry barely features.
Yes, it's
I think this
you're
one's
right.
a bit weak, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't... It just sort of stumbles along, and then at the end a zombie comes and pulls the guy's heart out, and...
Yeah, no, they're trying to get to the payoff of half showing this heart in a piece of paper at the end. They're trying to get to the shock of it, and I guess they're trying to use that title, Poetic Justice, and maybe they didn't quite get there with it.
No, I don't think it really makes sense.
But I will, again, Graham Ingels just so great at drawing these horrible people, just making them look so grotesque
Their faces are so contorted and
Yeah.
unpleasant looking.
Yes, absolutely, that's it. But you're stuck looking at them. He really crams them into the panels, like, as large as possible. Okay, and the last one we had... Oh, no, sorry, the fourth one. So there's another Graham Ingels one. It is Wish You Were Here from Honda Fear 22. So...
I like this one as well.
Yeah.
In this one, we are introduced to a couple who have gone bankrupt. Formerly wealthy,
Yeah.
now at the mercy of their creditors.
Yes. And they've got a house full of trinkets that they've accumulated from their world travels.
That's right. When during happier times. And the husband can't bear to part from them.
But he's considering, like, taking a loan on his insurance or something.
Yes.
And she's like, no, don't do that or whatever. Something. He holds on to it. He's like...
We need to... Yes, good point. You're right. Yes. And she says, no, we should sell. He says, no, I'll take a loan on my insurance. He goes, no, don't do that. We'll just sell some of these things. We can't sell those. They're our memories.
Yes.
He goes, no, memories are memories. We'll just sell these trinkets. And what about this statue? And it's a statue of a little Chinese man. And she says, remember when we got this from this creepy storekeeper in Hong Kong?
Yes, the same guy that sells Gremlins. He's in a lot of movies, this dude.
And he sold them the statue and told them to use it wisely.
Yes.
And as she's picking it up, she notices for the first time writing around the base.
Yes, in English.
Yeah, I noticed that as well on this Chinese statue.
Yeah. So there's a little thing about making wishes on there. It's rubbed out at the end. The last word is deplore. They can't read what comes before deplore. And it says use your wishes wisely. And she's like, oh, imagine if it were true. And he's like, this reminds me of a story.
I love this. I love how self-aware this one is.
Yeah, and she's like, well, what if it were true and we could do it? He's like, it's a monkey's paw. Don't make a wish. But she's like, I wish for...
the story.
Oh, yeah, first she says, I wish we could have... I wish for money. She's like, I wish
lots
for...
and lots of money.
That's what I wish.
And then he remembers... he remembers that the monkey's paw is not a happy story.
Yeah.
And that she absolutely should not make a wish. But she did. Then the phone rings. It's his lawyer.
Yeah.
Says something's happened regarding money and he needs to come down straight away and talk to him. And thinking no more of it, obviously wishes aren't real. She puts the statue down. He gets in his car, drives off.
Well, she thinks, oh, maybe my wish is coming true because it's something about money. That's what she thinks. Right. Momentarily. So he drives off, but he gets in a car wreck on the way. So they call the lawyer is on the scene of the wreck for... How did he end up there?
Doesn't matter.
I don't remember how he got there, but anyway, the police on the scene are like, well, can you inform the wife because you're friends of the family? And he's like, yeah. And his body's mangled.
Yes.
So he goes back and he's like, look, your husband just had a crash, his body's mangled, so you can't see it. But one silver lining is he had this insurance, so you're totally loaded. You don't ever have to worry about money again. And she's like, oh no, I wish he was back here now.
Well, first of all, she's horrified because she blamed it's her wish that did it.
Yes.
She wished for money.
Yeah.
He died. His life insurance is paid out.
Yeah.
And now she's rich. And she's, oh my God, it was the statue. It was the statue that did it.
Yeah.
And so far, this mirrors the story of the monkey's paw, which famously the son of the couple dies in a factory accident, and they get a payout after they wish for money. And then, and the lawyer has heard of the story of the monkey's paw, and he says, okay, just in case it's true, don't make any more wishes. And whatever you do, don't wish him back to life. Because in the story of the monkey's paw, the mother wishes the son back to life, and she doesn't specify what condition he will come back in. And the husband, with a terrible realization, dawns on him as he hears footsteps approaching the door. Yeah. And a knock. And he quickly grabs the monkey's paw and wishes him back in his grave. Sight unseen. We never see him. But great. Brilliant story. Perfect. Adapted countless times. What I like about this comic is that we're getting references to the short story all the way through.
And I thought when he first said, this reminds me of a story, I thought, that's very cheeky. But then he actually says, the monkey's paw. He says it out loud. It's like, okay, it's less cheeky. It's like, you know what you're doing.
I really like it. I like a bit of self-awareness. Yeah. And, so she now knows the story of the monkey's paw, so she decides to try and outfox the statue. She says, all right, I'll wish him back in the exact condition he was just before the accident. Yeah. And then she tells the undertakers to bring his body here. Yeah. To her house. They bring it in. It opens up. He's there, but he's dead. Yeah. And she says, what's happened? Why is he like this? And they say, what are you talking about? He died of a heart attack right before the car accident.
Yeah. So the car accident didn't kill him.
And then we have a great, as you mentioned about the kind of horrifying art, grotesque. Yeah. She looks horrifying in this. She's leaning over the coffin with a face like thunder. Yeah. Contorted all out of out of normality. It looks fantastic. She's furious and horrified that she's wasted her second wish, and she knows she's only got one left. And the lawyer's begging her not to do it again. Yeah, but she can't help herself. She says, "I want him back. I want him moving, breathing. I want him alive forever."
Yeah, well, she doesn't even say forever.
Okay, that's the film. She says forever.
Yeah, in the comic she just says talking, moving, alive. Breathing. Okay. Breathing, talking, moving, alive. Right. And he wakes up. Meanwhile, we get a panel of the
lawyer goes back to the
lawyer
side of the
goes
car
outside. The car accident. The car's not there. There's nothing. There's no sign of a wreck. Now, okay. All right, let's keep going, sir. Then I'll come back to
I agree. This
something.
doesn't really make sense because...
Well, how does the lawyer know... So he's in... I guess he was in the room when the wish
He was in the room when the wish happened. So what's happened was, originally, the husband was horrifically mangled in the crash.
Yeah.
But her wish made it so that he wasn't. It's a bit confusing, really. Yeah,
well, it's more confusing because now we learn that the husband has been embalmed already. So he doesn't have blood in his veins. He's got, like, formaldehyde. So he's in excruciating pain.
Yes.
Now I'm like, wait a second, did he die an hour ago? Have they embalmed him already? Like, and the movie's actually a little bit better at this because it's like maybe that evening.
Right.
So maybe they could have embalmed him. I don't think they do it that quickly,
right.
but
he's been embalmed. So he's alive, but he has no blood. His blood is embalming fluid.
So he's in excruciating agony. He's like, you have to kill me. And then she proceeds to chop him up. And she has to keep chopping because all the bits are alive. This is, by the way, exactly the same as the ending of Clive Barker's The Damnation Game. Because that novel, he kills us immortal, and the little bits are still like squirming around the room, and he's going around trying to chop each bit up.
Great.
So yeah, there's all these. She's reduced him. It says even when Jason could no longer make a sound, when Enid's frantic hacking had reduced him to 1,000,000 severed sections, each section still moved and jerked and quivered with life.
Ugh.
Mr. Shiner found it that way when he returned, cutting. And Mr. Shiner and the others, the men in the white coats that came to take Enid away, never noticed the tiny severed sections pulsating.
Pulsating!
Yeah.
Yes. It's like Fantasia, Mickey Mouse chopping up all the broomsticks.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and then, okay, so now we get to our last one, right? Which is Blind Alleys. Oh, this is not a Graham Ingels one. This was drawn by George Evans, who was a bit like more in the Joe Orlando mode of being like a fine draftsman who could probably be drawing more legitimate comics than these tales. But this is about a
crooked man who runs a retirement home for the blind.
Right. So it's just got these blind men living there, but he doesn't. The place is a total shithole. The walls are dilapidated. He doesn't turn on the heat.
He feeds them rubbish. He doesn't clean.
Yes.
And also, he's cruel.
He's very cruel. He likes playing pranks on them. He trips them. Yeah. He'll take away the banister from a stairway so they fall down, or he'll move stuff so they trip and fall. And he loves it. He has a great laugh. Meanwhile, his own office is beautifully decorated.
Yeah.
He's in there womanizing. He's got women in there. He's drinking. He's eating nice food. So the blind man finally decided to gang up.
Well, first of all, he's got a dog.
Yeah.
He has a large, fierce dog.
What was the dog's name in the comic? Do you remember? It was like Butch or...
I think it might be Butch. I think you're right. And it's a pit bull.
Yes.
Or a bulldog, rather. Sorry, a bulldog, not a pit bull. And this is what protects him from the inmates. But then one day, he forgets the dog. The dog is at the vet or something? No.
Brutus.
Yes. Well done. Then the blind men get one up on him. They manage to sequester the dog in a room.
Yeah.
Then they pounce on him.
Yeah.
Put him in a room next to the dog.
Yeah.
And leave them in there for 2 days straight. The dog becoming more and more frantic with hunger. And going wild, in fact.
Yes.
He's pleading with them. Feed me, or at least feed my dog, because he will go wild without food.
We'll go berserk. But also, there's apparently nobody else working at this place. So I think it might be very small, or I don't know. Surely he was not feeding the man himself.
He's so cheap that no one's feeding these. Maybe it doesn't. Whatever.
Yeah.
The blind men have. It's fine. They have sufficient agency. Maybe they've sent all the stuff home. Whatever. But while he's trapped in these rooms, him and his dog are trapped in this basement room. He can hear the sound of hammering and sawing going on outside. Then finally the door opens. He emerges out of the room into the light, and there's a maze. The blind men have built a maze that's studded with razor blades.
Yes, the walls. Yeah.
And in order for him to get out, he needs to be very, very careful. The walls are very close. He needs to move slowly and carefully so that he doesn't catch himself on the razor blades. Then, of course, they let out the dog.
Yes. So he has to run from the dog. And then...
Some idiot
turned out the lights.
Yes, and the final panel is just blackness.
Yes.
And it says some idiot turned out the lights.
Yeah. Now that's important because that's that callback to an earlier EC Comics story from a couple of years before called The October Game, which I think was based on a Bradbury story maybe. Okay. But it's a Halloween story where they play that game where, you know, where you have like, you're in a dark room and you're blindfolded and people bring out like the lettuce and they're like, here's somebody's brains, and you feel that. And then it's like, you got like an onion and there's somebody's eyeball or something like that. You're feeling it in the dark and everybody's getting grossed out and stuff. So it's that, but then in the final panels, and then some idiot turned on the lights. And that's the last panel. Everybody's like...
So this is a reference to that?
Yeah.
It's also...
Has to be.
It's also quite a funny kind of denouement. After... Because they don't show... Obviously, they don't show the dog savaging him. They don't show him slicing himself to ribbons on the razor blades. Rather, we get this funnily ironic message, because of course the blind men are always in the dark.
Yes,
and they just put him in the same situation that they're always in. And of course he meets a grisly fate in the darkness. I like it. Yeah. Very satisfying ending.
Okay, so let's get to this movie from Amicus Pictures, 1972. I didn't even write down the name of the director or writer.
No problem.
And they're not even listed readily on the Wikipedia page.
That's fine. Well, it opens with some bark on the toccata and fugue in D minor on the organ.
Yes. I noticed that. Yes.
Very good. And I also noticed in the opening credits, Shane, trained by Michael Walsh. Because Shane, of course, is the name of the dog.
It's not Brutus. I didn't know. That's why I wanted to bring...
I mean, he's called Shane in the...
He's called Shane, yeah. So this is a... the opening credits are... It's a 90-minute movie with 5 stories in it. And we open on a cemetery in the daytime. And it says based on comic magazines published by EC Comics in the opening credits. So... Then we see that there's a tour happening of the cemetery, of the tombs, of the crypts.
Yes.
And one group of people, 5 people, kind of wander off or something.
Yes, the guide specifically warns that they need to stay close because the crypts can be dangerous.
Yes.
But the woman, the sole woman in the group of 5, who's played by Joan Collins, known to nerds as Edith Keeler.
Yeah, absolutely.
From City on the Edge of Forever. And she drops a brooch.
Yes.
They help her look for it, and by the time they've found it, the tour group has moved on.
Yes.
And they're lost. So they move around a bit, wander through the catacombs, can't quite find where they're supposed to go, and then a door opens. Yeah. Well, actually...
By the way, the brooch was right next to her. Like, they find it right there at her feet. Anyway, yeah, so as you... Go ahead.
Yeah, well, then a stone door opens with much grinding. They enter into a room with a very ominous-looking kind of stone seat beneath a skull. The room's empty. There's no way out of the room. They turn around to go back through the door. It slams shut. Then the Crypt Keeper appears. This is not the Crypt Keeper of the 90s, the gibbering, punning zombie. This is a man. He looks much more like the Crypt Keeper in the comics, actually.
Yeah,
kind of
it's actually
ugly guy in a brown robe.
This actor, let me see if I can find it. Was I can't find his name. Oh, that's why I'm on. Okay, the actor was the guy who played the Supreme Being in Time Bandits.
Okay.
And actually, and I've only seen Time Bandits twice in my life, but I recognized him.
Great.
Somehow when I saw him. His name was Ralph Richardson.
Ralph Richardson?
Yeah.
Yep. So he tells them to sit down. He plays everything very straight. He's not punning.
No.
He's not joking.
No.
He just tells them to take a seat, and he sort of gives cryptic warnings, doesn't he?
Yes.
Or makes cryptic statements. And he makes eye contact with them, and then they are launched into a vision, which he says is a warning, perhaps?
Yes, it's what they're going to do anyway. Once they leave this place.
He strongly implies that it's what's going to happen to them.
Yeah. Once they leave this place. Like, where were you going? Where were you on your way to before you stopped at this cemetery?
Right, that's what he says. He says, and then, it's almost like, dude, where's my car?
Yeah.
He keeps saying, and then... She says, well, I just stopped in here on the way somewhere else. And then they're launched into their vision of what they were, the great act of their life was going to be, apparently. So, first of all, we start with the Santa story all through the house.
With Joan Collins as the murderess. Yes. In a very pink house.
Unlike the comic we see, or well, we don't quite see it, but the murder happens in front of us.
Well, we see it. He's got it. It starts with a husband. He's got a gift for his wife. He's written a card that says, "To the best wife in the world."
Yes.
And then he happily sets it there. He can't wait for her to open this present. She's gonna love it. And then he goes sits down to read his paper. And he sits down. We see a hand picking up the poker from the fireplace, and then there's a splatter on the newspaper from behind it.
Yeah.
And then he keels over.
We hear a thud, and we see gore splatter through the newspaper.
Yeah.
So he's reading the paper, and all we see of the shot is the newspaper as he's reading it. So the shot is just full of newspaper.
Yeah.
Then we hear a thud.
Yeah.
And gore splatters on the newspaper from the inside. The newspaper is lowered. There he is with blood on his forehead and his tongue sticking out, and then he collapses face first onto a white rug, and I was like, no, not a white rug.
Yeah. This is real giallo blood. It's like really thick, more red than real blood. It's like
looks
really
like paint. It looks like red paint.
It absolutely looks like red paint.
Raspberry coloured paint.
Yes. So
giallo blood.
Yeah.
Like yellow blood.
Oh yeah, actually, I guess it is really.
I know what you meant.
So she's like, okay, she goes. The daughter's upstairs. She like goes.
We get a little scene that we don't get in the comic where she's...
Oh yeah, she goes to the safe.
Yes, where there's a life insurance policy.
Yes. So,
I don't know why you keep your life insurance policy in the safe. Why not?
Yeah.
Because it's valuable. Yeah, I mean, actually, it's a pretty easy way of showing us that it's valuable. He keeps it in the safe.
Yes.
She takes the keys out of his pocket, opens the safe. We can plainly see that it's a life insurance policy.
Yeah.
Her daughter calls out, she puts it back, she goes upstairs, and we get a little sequence where the daughter talks about how much she can't wait to see Santa Claus.
I think she says that in the comic too. She wants to see Santa in the comic. And the mom says, "Go to sleep or Santa won't come," which she does in the movie too.
Yes.
But we've got a bit of a reversal here or something, because in the comic we have no motivation for the murder.
Right.
It's just EC Comics nastiness going on.
Well, this is still pretty nasty, but it's a little
nasty,
more...
but now we've got... The nastiness comes from him being a nice guy, but she's killed him anyway. That's what she's done. And now we've got this money thing that's been inserted into it. So then we get the radio report about the murderer. She sees the guy shows up at her house. He's outside, so she locks all the doors and windows.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so he shows up pretty quick again, and even we get a jump scare. There's not a lot of jump scares in this, but we get a jump scare where he reaches through.
Yes.
I think the back patio or something like that before she can lock the door. He doesn't get her, but she locks it and bolts it and so on. Again, the Santa doesn't look particularly frightening.
But
just a guy. I think they've tried to add some scars on his face.
Yeah, he's just an old dude.
Yeah, he doesn't.
Also, in the radio report, there's no mention that this killer doesn't harm children or man. It's just a homicidal maniac.
Yes. Which
I think is key to her letting him in the house at the end of the story, which is what happens in the movie as well, as the daughter comes down.
Once again, Joan Collins runs around the house, securing everything.
Yes.
And
very pink house.
She cleans the fake blood off the white rug.
There seems to be a stain on the safe. Now I was wondering, I kept rewinding bits of this movie. It's like, did I miss something? Did I see what I saw? It looks like she might have got a blood stain on the safe earlier. I don't know. It could be mistake. Could have just been something else.
Right. So, well, maybe she had literal blood on her hands when she went to open the safe. And there was no time pressure at the start.
No,
it's when the maniac shows up. That's when she
even the daughter doesn't say, "I'm going to come down," which I think she does in the comic, and she's like, "No, stay upstairs." In the movie, she just goes up there and just tells the daughter to stay in bed.
She does.
And I feel like it's kind of missing the paranoia, that Johnny Craig paranoia that's in his comics, where she's really frantic about, oh my God, this, now I got to do this and worry about the daughter. The daughter's almost not a problem in the movie version. She's well behaved. She's not trying to come downstairs all the time.
Right.
I feel like.
I think I think it's much the same. I like this segment.
But yes, I liked it too.
It's shot really well, I think.
Really interesting thing about this versus DC Comics, and the reason I mentioned the captions with the narration, which were put in before the artwork, is because we don't get that. There's no voiceover in the movie.
Instead, it's just a Christmas carols playing.
Yes.
Which I kind of like. And it's diegetic Christmas carols because it's the radio. We often cut back to the radio.
Yeah.
It's a little sedate at times. I think I agree with you about we're not really getting a sense of the ratcheting paranoia because I think of too many shots back to the radio and not enough shots back to the maniac.
Yeah. And by the way, there's a moment where when after she's killed him, she notices the present he's left for her and she opens it and reads a card and she has this smile on her face almost like that guy kind of thing, and then closes it up again. I just thought it was such a great touch for that one instant.
But yes, I feel like I was never certain where the urgency was coming from. It almost seemed like, well, she wants to get on the phone to call the police.
Yes.
And in fact, it's shown quite well with no dialogue again. Yeah. It's shown her going to the phone, picking it up, and then she looks away, and then we cut to the window.
Yeah.
It's like, yep. Of course, she's worried about the maniac. Yes. That's why she can't call the police.
She's got the body. That's why she can't call the police. She wants to call the police because of the maniac. She can't call the police because she sees the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite shown really well without dialogue.
Yeah.
She puts him in the basement. We spend a lot of time with how she's cleaning the house.
Yeah.
Again, so is the urgency...
But I think it's her...
How urgently do you have to clean?
And her plan was to put him in the basement. I think that was her plan from the beginning in the movie. Somehow I thought that. Okay.
I think, again, maybe she was going to just deal with the whole thing at her leisure because she, whatever. It was Christmas, the girl's in
Christmas
bed.
night, right.
With the urgency, she has to decide, come up with something on the spot.
Yeah.
So she takes him down the cellar. Again, she just sort of occurred.
Oh, what she comes up with on the spot is making it look like he tripped and fell. Yeah. Because she collects some of his blood and pours it around the scene. That's what the
she realizes that without dialogue, she realizes that there's no blood down there. It's shown without dialogue, and so she goes upstairs. She scoops up blood with a wine glass, and then she pours it over him. Never going to fool a good forensic pathologist.
No.
And then she goes back up, and we get a long sequence of her rinsing the glass, washing
the blood
her
going
hands,
down the drain.
Blood going down the drain. All very artistic, but not really conducive to a growing sense of kind of urgency.
Yeah.
It's a bit sedate.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the reveal is great, though. She looks up and sees the door open where her daughter should be. And she calls out, daughter's name, forget it. Daughter's name.
Yeah.
Runs up, she's not there. Runs down to the front door. She's drawn some curtains. So there's an alcove at the front door, kind of like a small alcove, which she can separate from the rest of the house with some curtains. She's drawn them out of panic earlier when she's locked the front door. Now she slowly walks towards it, gets ready to pull them open, and a hand comes through with a bell. It's been established that the Santa has a bell. It rings, and it's her daughter. And she says, "He's here, he's here!" And he sure is here.
He comes in and then he strangles her to death.
In probably the weakest bit of the
because his hands are kind of on her shoulders.
Yeah, it looks like he's giving her a massage.
And Again, I like the ending of the comic more than you did, where he's just standing there, the creepo is standing there, ready to kill her.
I agree. If he was if we'd had an ending more like the comic, a shot over...
If he just, raised an axe and then hard cut back to the crypt. A shot over Joan's
shoulder with her looking horrified and the daughter standing with Santa. But I do like the bell through the curtains.
Yes.
And then the curtains pulled apart and there he is. Yeah. I do like that. Perhaps it should have ended there instead of... Although she does run for the poker.
Yes, that's true, yes. Yeah.
No, it's not going to work this time.
Okay, so then we get... another thing is we don't get the titles of these stories.
No.
Which I think...
We're not missing much.
I don't know. I think it forces you to take them more seriously, and you don't have a jokey Crypt Keeper. The Crypt Keeper is very serious, so...
I think that's why we have the changes throughout to make the characters more villainous.
You know what, I think that, yes, but I also think this is and the daytime crypt and everything made me feel, and Ralph Richardson in the role as a Crypt Keeper, this is it's like an alternate universe EC Comics. It's like a very British sensibility, Hammer horror. What if Hammer horror made EC Comics instead of a bunch of Americans that were trying to do anti-Leave It to Beaver, if you know what I mean. And it is 15 years later, 20 years later after all that stuff. So there's a very different sensibility about it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but certain things like missing the titles and the jokiness of it, like that it's supposed to be a gag. You're not supposed to really revel in the gore. Well, maybe you are a bit, but you're supposed to revel in the comeuppance of it. And I think that's kind of subtracted a little bit from the movie because those elements were missing. But anyway.
Sure.
Okay. So this one plays out. Yeah, this one plays out a little bit differently. This guy has a wife.
Right. So
Reflection of Death.
You're talking about the next one, Reflection of Death. So I'll just quickly mention that once Joan Collins is massaged to death, we return to the crypt. And then it moves on to the next person. So the framing device is present in between stories.
Yes, right.
With the Crypt Keeper offering his cryptic utterances. And moving on to the next person.
Yes. So this story started, I was like, which one is this? I don't remember reading this comic. It's a guy with his wife, and he's going to go on a business trip or something. He kisses the kids goodbye, and then he leaves, and then he actually goes to his mistress's house.
Yes.
And then,
she's living in a nice furnished apartment.
Yep. And then they get into a car to drive. They're going to leave town together for good.
Yes.
He's leaving his wife with
they're packing up all those nice furnishings and sending them to the new apartment.
Yeah.
Where he's going to live in
and
sin.
I'm still like, which story? I'm trying to remember which story this is as I'm watching it. And then they get in the car and they're very sleepy, so they switch drivers. It's like, Reflection of Death. Okay.
Yeah.
So they switch sides, and car crash happens. The car crash is done pretty cheaply but creatively, I guess. They're like spinning the camera around, trying to make it look like a crash. All the driving scenes are like done in front, like with rear projection. It doesn't look like they're driving.
Yeah.
There's a crash, and then he...
Straight away, I got a problem. So the POV, we switches to POV much like the comic, but it's way less effective in the film because we know what's happening. We know we're seeing it from his point of view.
And also, when he wakes up, does he see the car on fire there?
Yeah, that immediately bugged me.
Yeah.
So this is, I know from reading...
It doesn't make sense.
We know because we read the comic.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense, agreed. Because later on, we find out that it's been 2 years.
Yeah, not 2 months, yeah.
So but he wakes up and sees the flaming car.
Yeah.
Wow, it's magic. Magic. I mean, and walking corpses aren't real either. Anyway, otherwise it plays out very similar to the comic. He stops the car, the guy yells, "Are you trying to get killed?" Much like he does in the comic.
Yeah.
Screams in terror, burns rubber and pulls away. He meets a hobo at an underpass, much like the comic. Hobo runs away. He goes to his own home.
Fortunately, they've cut out 2 more of the runaways, I think, that happen in the comic. I think it happens 4 times in the comic.
They substitute him going to his home where he...
Oh, yes, that's right.
He sees his wife sees him.
Yeah.
This is funny. And again, not terrifying at all. His wife opens the door, screams in terror when she sees him, and slams it. And then he walks over to the open window and looks in.
Yeah.
And he sees his wife embracing another man.
Yeah. The nameplate on the door has changed. His name's not on the door anymore. Yeah.
That's right. And they're literally like 2 meters away from him, where he's looking in at them at the window. Yeah.
I think they needed to change it to 2 years to facilitate that scene.
Right, because she's remarried.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Still pretty quick.
Yeah.
Oh, but then he was a cheating bastard. And presumably
yes, but she didn't know that.
Well, she probably found out when he was found in a car with his mistress.
Right. That's right. Okay. So he goes over to the mistress's house. Instead of Carl's house.
The apartment that was...
Apartment, yes.
Where they packed up all the furniture and sent it away. She opens the door. Again, it's nothing like the comic. She just looks sort of confused to see him.
But she's blind.
She is blind, yeah. But it's not... What I mean when I say nothing like the comic, there's none of that... The eyes aren't in shadow the way they were.
Yes, right. There's no... You can't hide that she's blind, I guess. I guess you can't really...
The impact is way less. So, she's blind. He says, "It's me." And she's like, "What do you mean?"
I don't think he ever even... Does he speak in the comic?
He does speak, and he speaks in a normal voice.
Okay, alright.
And, and then...
And then he sees a reflection in the table.
And it looks terrible. We only see it for a split second.
Split second, yeah.
Unless you pause it, which I did, and it looks like rubbish.
Yeah, okay.
And then the exact same. He wakes up in the car from having a dream. Interestingly, we'd already seen him waking up from that dream earlier on, so he'd
Oh,
already
that's
fallen
right.
asleep.
Yes, that's right. He already had one. So that was a good touch, I thought, actually.
Yeah, and then of course, yeah, it really emphasizes. The
You don't know what
cyclical-
he's having some nightmare as they're driving. You don't know what it is the first time. You're like, what's he dreaming about that he's freaking out about?
Yeah, it emphasizes the cyclical nature of what
Yeah.
he's suffering, or is he? Because he's in the crypt with the crypt keeper.
Well, he's
But it's
going
gonna
to
happen in the
it's
future.
going to happen.
Maybe.
if he.
Or that's where he was going.
No, he's definitely. Oh yeah, he was going to. Well,
It's confusing.
especially when he gets to the very end of the
yes,
movie, it's
yeah.
doubly confusing. Yeah, he was going to do this thing. So in this, we've got a clear case of comeuppance because he was cheating on his wife.
Yes.
So now he's getting what he deserves from the universe.
Yep. Which is to be a zombie.
Yeah.
Is being a zombie because you were unfaithful? Is that proportionate
I
punishment?
don't know. He might not even. Yeah, he's being a zombie again and again and not
Being
getting out
killed
of the
and cursed to be a zombie?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Depends on his religion, I suppose.
Yeah.
Next one is Poetic Justice with Peter Cushing,
Yes. Oh my God. Okay.
known to modern audiences as digital zombie.
Well,
Grand Moff
I was
Tarkin.
about to say, note to Disney,
Yeah.
Peter Cushing was a legendary actor who could emote with his face and move his eyebrows. He's great in this. Really different role for him, I think.
Yes.
Especially from the... I don't want to say bet, but I wonder if they offered him a different part in this that was more Hammer-like, and he was like, no, I want
I
the
have
old
data
guy.
relevant to this
Okay.
conversation.
All right.
He was originally offered the part of Monkey Paw Guy,
Ah, okay.
the businessman.
Yeah.
But he wanted to try something different, so he took this role as the elderly garbage man Grimsdyke.
Right.
Is his name.
Right. Yeah.
He also, I may as well mention this now, he also took the role because Grimsdyke, the Dustman, has a big part of his character is that he has the deceased wife.
Yes.
And at time of filming, Peter Cushing's wife had only very recently passed away.
Okay.
And and it's often made reference to online that in these scenes, where he talks to his picture of his wife, that he is quote unquote barely acting.
Right.
In fact, they were apparently very close. So much so that Peter Cushing's autobiography ends when his wife dies.
Wow. Wow, okay. That's
So anyway,
heavy.
Yeah, yeah. So this is actually quite a great performance from Peter Cushing. In big contrast from his usual roles where he plays upper class villainous kind of monsters.
Yes.
Or
Van Helsing.
Oh yeah, so it's kind of like a upper class, very much in control,
Yeah.
iron-willed
Yes.
upper class investigator or villain types. In this, he's a kind of lower class.
Well, you've really hit the nail on the head because this one played very differently to the EC comic one to me. Not just because of the plot, but there's a real British class thing going on
Yes.
in this segment. Especially the actresses they've chosen, who are the parents of the kids that are hanging out, have real posh accents.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's you can tell when they take the kids away, it's like almost like a class thing.
Yes.
That they don't want them hanging
Yes.
with
Well, this is a British production.
Yeah,
I should point out.
sure.
I mean, if you hadn't pointed that out already, so this would have been very obvious to them making the film.
Yeah.
That this kind of dimension to the story would have been very obvious. to them.
Yeah. In the EC comic story, they're rich and poor, but I mean the city, all the city folk are rich and the garbage man is poor, but they're all drawn by Graham Ingels, so they look horrible. They look like horrible rich people.
They all look like swollen,
Yeah.
purse-faced monsters.
Yes, absolutely. They're so leathery and gross. So in this movie where people they actually look upper crust, there's a real difference there. So I did appreciate that. So yeah, as I alluded to, the big plot difference is this guy uses a Ouija board to communicate with his wife, and they find
He's an occultist.
he's an occultist. They find
is
books about the occult in his house.
Not usually associated with positive characters. Although Van Helsing being an exception, and also I think did Peter Cushing or was it Christopher Lee that was in The Devil Rides Out, where I think it's Christopher Lee actually, but that's a similar character, a heroic protagonist who's also an expert on the occult.
I kind of wondered if he found these books and the Ouija board in the garbage. I actually was wondering that. But also, his
he's
proficient. The picture of his wife, really, she looks like Madame Blavatsky or something. It looks like some ancient, somebody who was conducting seances in the 1890s.
What a reference.
So anyway, there's all this background. The thing I didn't like in this was you get to see his house because the kids are in there. So you see how nice the interior is well before the audience does, because we're not in those cramped Graham Ingels panels where you don't get to see beyond people's faces. So that didn't quite work there. But basically it's the same. They tear up the rose bushes. They blame it on the dogs. So the dogs are taken away because he can't afford licenses for... He's got one dog or a couple dogs and it's not like 30 pets, which he has in the comic.
Well, he has a bunch of them in a cage. It's about 5 or 6 dogs.
Okay, all right.
That he has.
Yeah, right.
And he can't afford licenses for them. Because the license costs
Well, in the
money.
comic, there's a whole sequence where they raise the price, or they don't have licensing, and they introduce licensing specifically so that he won't be able to afford it.
I mean, it's basically the same.
Yeah, it's basically
They start enforcing this rule that earlier they'd not enforced.
Yes.
The dog's taken away, he's miserable. The children are made to stay away from him. In this case, they deliberately spread around the rumour that he has an unhealthy interest in the children.
Yes.
Right. And he's all alone. He talks to his wife, Helen. Incidentally, that was Peter Cushing's wife's name, Helen.
Okay.
Again,
Okay.
renamed for that.
That's heavy.
Yeah.
Very
it's
heavy.
heavy stuff. I mean, he gives a great... I mean, he's a great actor.
Yeah.
So he gives a great performance in this as a doddering old fellow.
Yeah.
You really identify with him right up until he comes back as a fucking terrifying zombie.
Yeah, so we get the Valentine's Day cards. They
Yes.
go out with the poems. I think the poems came straight from the comic, some of them.
Yes.
So he hangs himself. As they come in, they're surprised how clean the house is. He's been missing
They
for a
see
few
the
days.
pamphlets or the books with
They
the...
see
that are
the
about
occult books. He's hanging. We see his feet, as in the comic. We just see his feet. We get an actual funeral scene, and then we cut to it's a year later, and they're reminiscing about what happened because they pull out some old.
Well, it seems like they feel bad about it.
They do kind of feel a bit bad about
but
it.
it's
Seems
too late.
Yeah.
In fact, they pay for the funeral.
Yes, that's right. That
But
is
it's
right.
too late.
Yeah.
And it's a year later. The snobby son opens a drawer and sees the Valentine's cards from the previous year. He doesn't like the look of that because it reminds him of this crime, this terrible act that he did. So he burns them in the fire. Father says, "What's that?" He goes, "Oh, just so we don't forget. Oh, they're just some Valentine's cards from last year. Like what we did last year."
Yeah, exactly a year ago today.
Yeah, just so we don't forget.
Yeah.
And then we get this great scene. Peter Cushing, I think the only time in his career when he actually dresses up as a monster.
I haven't seen his 500 movies, but I certainly never remembered seeing him looking like that in anything.
So we get the graveyard at night, and he sits up in the grave, and it looks really good.
Yeah.
So unlike the adulterous guy zombie who we see very briefly in the reflection in the coffee table, which looked like crap, this looks fantastic. And the son is in the mansion, sitting in the dark, or in a not very well lit room, and Peter Cushing, Grimsdyke, as a zombie, comes in. He's in shadow, but and it just looks horrifying.
Yeah. yeah.
It is really scary.
Yeah.
This isn't a particularly scary movie, but this is the bit where I was glad I had the light on when I was watching it. And then, we see him come in the room, he's moving around in the distance. It's great because it's just not particularly well lit, it's in shadow, so he looks good.
Yeah.
Then the son looks up, sees him in close-up, you can just barely see, it's got empty eye sockets. They've done it with fabric. You can just barely see the fabric. It still works, still looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And then, cut to the next morning, the father again finds the still beating heart.
The still beating heart. The heart has been pulled out the night before and is wrapped in paper, but is still beating.
Magic. It's cultism.
It's his occult knowledge that somehow...
And this time we get a poem.
Yes.
Which, where, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but the punchline is heart.
Yes.
Now turns out you have no... ...
Right.
And then he opens it up, and it's a visual punchline.
Yeah. And the poem is actually good because it's written scrawled in blood.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's good.
It's
good. Very satisfying.
Okay, so now we get to Wish You Were Here, another one where the title came first. So
a little credit. They might have just kept. They might have.
Yeah.
You never know. You never know.
So I think this opens with an accountant with the husband talking to the accountant, which was good because in the comic, the accountant thing just happens. It's like four panels in.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, he gets a call from his accountant.
Yeah.
So it actually establishes a bit here.
Yeah, here it's his accountant or lawyer that's telling him that he's got creditors, he's got debts, there's nothing left. And also, the film takes great pains to tell us that he didn't make his money morally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. But...
unlike the characters in the comic where they were rich, now they're not.
They used the statuette foolishly.
Yeah, in this case... He didn't make his money. He hurt people.
Yeah.
He spent money that was entrusted to him.
Yeah. And
he was running guns.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes, you're absolutely right. I kind of didn't pick up on that. But they don't mention, so they've established a lawyer, but they don't establish the insurance. That's like a surprise that pops up.
Yeah.
Once that wish happens, for whatever reason, they've reversed things around. So as it plays out the same. He gets the call from the lawyer. I need to talk to you about money. He takes off on a bike. He's chased by.
He takes off in a car.
And
then now this didn't pay off. I agree. As he's leaving, we see a figure in black hiding behind a tree.
Yeah. Who then follows him.
Who follows him.
On a motorbike.
Yeah, on a motorcycle. And then, so we get a short sequence, about a minute, 2 minutes, where they're driving, and the motorcyclist gets closer and closer and closer and closer, and he looks in the rearview mirror, and the motorcyclist has a skull face.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's it. Now, yeah, I found this puzzle. I don't know, like, where's the payoff
I
here?
thought this was supposed to be the Grim Reaper on a motorbike.
Yeah, that's what it is.
But the mask doesn't look good. You can see the guy's eyes and skin like underneath it.
Yeah, it just looks like he's wearing a balaclava. You could think it was some
rando, but he was hanging out at the house.
No, exactly. That's what I thought when I was going back and looking at it. It's like, so it was just an accident, or this rando was summoned by the wish to scare him into having that heart attack. But no,
yes, but then they have. Why do you need to establish a heart attack before the crash?
Well, the consensus online is, as you say, that it's the Grim Reaper.
Okay.
So it's just the figure of death that's following him because he's about to die.
Okay.
But it's absolutely not made clear. And this Grim Reaper doesn't appear in any of the other stories.
No.
So it's not a strong point.
No. But
in this vignette.
And then also so it basically plays out the same. So I won't go into it too much, but at the end, when she chops him up, she basically makes a couple of slices with the samurai sword, the katana that she has handy.
Yeah.
Which it was kind of a good touch because they collected all their stuff on their travels.
Yes.
But she kind of slices him. She does say forever, which you pointed out when we were talking about the comic. She says, "I want him to be alive forever," and she slices him to kill him because he's in pain because of the formaldehyde. And we get a close up of some guts.
Yeah.
And that's it. We don't get the full...
We get a hand moving.
We'll get a hand move. The hand, that was kind of a good effect. I actually did wonder how they did it. But we don't get her going insane.
A seven hand moving, yeah.
And then we don't get the men in white coats coming in to take her away because she's gone mad and she's chopped this thing into tiny bits. It's just like...
No, it just ends when he's still intact, really. He just has one hand cut off.
The shock is supposed to be seeing the guts, which we see for a split second, I guess,
a big deal in 1972, obviously not by modern standards.
Yeah.
Another thing is, this one hurts from an accelerated timeline. She wishes him as he was before the accident, and then the embalmers wheel him... The undertakers, wearing top hats as they do in the UK, wheeled the coffin straight in, like straight after she makes the wish.
Yes.
He shouldn't have been embalmed.
But
because she just wished him into the state he was before the accident. Which...
Right.
which,
that's true. Oh,
I think it might be true in the... It's less true in the comic, I think, because there's been some passage of time in the comic. It might be later in the day.
Okay. I was about to say in the movie it's like nighttime when the lawyer comes and tells her all the stuff or whatever, so I thought, okay, maybe... Okay,
we see it in real time, her making the wish.
Yeah,
so if he was back, he should have had no formaldehyde.
Okay. Doesn't quite add up. Okay, so...
And it's a bit less... I think... No, it's fine. I felt it was a bit less... less literary references with the... But it's still present.
There's not that cheeky line where he says, "This reminds me of a story," which is the one that snagged me on the comic.
I liked that.
Yeah.
And it was
No, I like that in the comic too.
Yeah, it's played a bit more straight in the film, a bit less cheeky, which I like, but didn't like as well. It's like you said, it's played a lot. This is played very straight. This film, which is to its detriment. All right, the last and longest story.
Yeah, so this is the one about the... So this is a slightly different... It plays it a little bit differently because this guy is taking over... He's becoming the director of this facility for the blind, and it's a huge thing. It's like in an old English manor or something.
Yes.
And he's taken over as a new director. He immediately starts cutting corners, cutting costs, turning off the heat, serving crap food.
He's a military man, which we're told over and over.
Yes, he's a major.
He insists on being addressed as Major.
Yeah, and
never a good sign in a civilian.
He has done up his office as in the comic, but there's no womanizing, and there's no he doesn't like play pranks on them.
Yeah, again, they've gone for a serious tone, haven't they? So the pranks would be a bit silly.
Even the womanizing would have been probably. Maybe would have looked ridiculous. I'm not sure.
Instead we get. But I don't know. There was time because this is a long segment.
Yeah,
and it's about 90% blind guys doing carpentry.
Yes, but we do get other staff in the facility, which we do see them having to deal with those people.
Yes,
when they discover what they're up to or whatever, or how they deal with them.
We have a spokesman for the blind men. So the dialogue, the information that's delivered through captions in the comic is delivered through dialogue, obviously, in the film, which is specifically that blind people suffer more in this situation because their other senses are so keen.
Yeah.
This is a debatable point.
Yeah.
But it's great rhetorically in the film and in the comic. The idea being that because they're blind, they feel the dirt more
and the
keenly.
cold.
They feel the cold more keenly. The food tastes worse.
Yeah.
And so on. And this is all delivered by the only guy that can act in this whole bit.
Yeah.
The man playing the spokesman.
That actor looks familiar.
I think he's another well-established British kind of like actor with many, many credits.
Okay.
He's great. The rest of the people... Let's just say they didn't cast blind people.
Right.
And the other bloke, the bloke he's playing opposite is all right too. The major jerk. Anyway, he has a dog as well. This time it's not a bulldog; it's a German Shepherd called Shane.
Right.
The Shane mentioned in the opening credits. Again, it protects him when they attempt to accost him. A man this time, instead of just getting fed up with the pranks and the poor treatment, a man dies from the cold.
Right.
And they all, in a great little bit, they all get out of bed at the same time when the Major finds his dead body. And I just thought, it's going to kick off right now, because the dog's not here. But no, it doesn't. They wait. We have a long sequence where the spokesman they all put bacon on a plate. This sequence feels like it goes for 10 minutes. They all put bacon on a plate.
Yeah.
They're at lunch. They all secretly put that, and they're blindly handing it to one another.
Yeah.
So they'll tap one another on the shoulder and pass the plate while staring.
We're meant to see how clever this scheme there. It's like the Great Escape thing, right?
Yeah, sure. So then they collect all the bacon, and the spokesman lays a trail of bacon out of the office. The dog follows it. They shut him in. Then they seize the Major, put him in the cell next to him. From there it plays out much like the comic, except we get another 10 minutes. This isn't a film that goes for only 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Another feels like 10 minutes of guys doing carpentry.
Yeah.
Blind guys doing carpentry. It lasts roughly a year.
Yeah.
We get a lot of shots of the Major pacing his cell, a lot of shots of the very well-trained dog clawing at the door and barking frenziedly. Eventually he's let out.
Yes.
And the maze is a bit simpler than it is in the comic. It seems to be... It's pretty bare bones. It's just a framework.
And they put it in the basement, or...
Yes. So it's just in the basement.
Space is very limited.
It's not a maze. It's a corridor.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look particularly sturdy, frankly. He probably could have kicked his way out, because it's just a framework with some... It looks like hessian strung across it.
Yes, one part. Yeah.
But I guess he's starving, he hasn't eaten for 2 days, eaten or drunk for 2 days, he's not in the right frame of mind, he just wants to get out. They've left a door ajar. He heads to the door, they slam it shut right as he gets to it.
Yeah.
He can't get out that way. He can either go back to his cell, or he can look to the right. He looks to the right, and it's a very, very narrow passage that they've made, lined with razor blades.
Yeah.
Well, I say razor blades, they're razor blades in close up.
Yes.
In a long shot, they're just bits of blunt metal. Right. It's very obvious. Anyway, again, and this time we have quite an extended sequence of him. He has to really inch through them.
Yes.
There's barely enough room for him to squeeze through. He gets through the corridor, but it only leads to the next door cell, the neighbouring cell that his dog's in. There's a string, we can quite plainly see it attached to the latch. As he gets close to the door, the latch is pulled, the door opens, the dog comes out. It's starving, it's crazy. It chases him, and then he runs back to he looks at the razor blades, he looks at the dog, he looks at the razor blades, he starts to squeeze through, then the lights go. We see the blind guy, the spokesman, we see him flick off the light.
Yeah.
And that's it.
By the way, that guy, I've just looked him up, his name is Patrick Magee, and he was the writer in Clockwork Orange.
The writer?
The writer. Remember the writer that got attacked?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so then we finally get to the end, and it's revealed that when these 5 visitors to the crypt try to exit the crypt, there's actually just like a pit, like a...
Oh, he says they can leave now.
You can leave.
But it turns out that they can't really. There's nowhere to go.
No.
Because they're in hell.
Yes, it's a pit into flames.
They've lost their memory, and the Crypt Keeper is just there to show them why they're in hell, maybe. Or maybe he's just showing them how they died. It's not really very well established.
I was still wondering,
Well, no, it specifically shows he shows them their death.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? Not their sin. Because they died unrepentant, is what he says.
Ah, okay.
But it doesn't...
But the whole time before, he said these are the things you're going to do.
No, it's because they've forgotten why they're in hell. So he's reminding them of how they died.
Okay.
So they'll know why they're in hell.
Okay.
Because they died unrepentant. It's not a good framing device, frankly. Because the way they died is not always related to their sin.
Yes.
And it's not always supernatural either.
No.
And also, another point, the monkey, poor guy, shouldn't even be in hell.
No.
Because because his wife wished him alive forever.
Yeah, that's right.
He should still be in his screaming meat body. Up on the surface. So it's all a bit...
Okay.
Although I do like the ending.
Yes, you want to tell us about the last line of the...
It's great. It's great. Great fourth wall breaking ending. The Crypt Keeper, his skull throne now lights up with fire in the eye sockets of the skull. Mm-hmm. Looks awesome. He sits down and says to himself, and now, who's next? Perhaps you?
Yes, some roll credits.
Roll credits. Of course, he looks straight into camera.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I like the ending. No, I like the last line, I should say.
Yeah.
I didn't like the ending.
Okay, we need to have any trivia that we want to cover?
I do have some. I'll go through it very quickly. The box office take.
This interesting. Okay.
This cost I can't find any kind of really good statistics online for how much the film made.
Okay.
It cost £170,000.
Okay.
It's pretty cheap. It made at least $3 million US.
Whoa. Okay.
This is just in the US.
Okay.
It made at least $3 million in the US box office alone.
Okay.
So that's not counting which put it, I think, at least in the top 20 films that year.
Okay.
In 1972. I looked up the top 10, and it wasn't in there. But $3 million is pretty good for 1972.
Yes. Well, it did warrant an immediate sequel. So. Yeah.
So this did well. People dug this movie.
Okay.
Oh yeah. The only other piece of trivia I have is that there was a tie-in novel that was written.
Oh, okay.
A novelization
Okay.
of the film. It was written by Jack Olek, which might be a name you'd know. Ah, too bad. It's his Wikipedia article says he worked on EC.
Okay.
And he also wrote for DC afterwards as well. So apparently, so active in the field of comics.
Okay.
Okay, but
No,
clearly not that famous.
No.
So that's okay.
But to me, a novel of EC Comics, it defeats the point of EC Comics.
Well, it's not a novel of EC Comics. It's a novel of Tales of the Crypt film.
Yes,
it's a novelization of a film.
A novelization of film of the comics.
And it's just...
But it's also, I noticed recently some companies started releasing audiobooks of EC Comics. I'm like, hey, do you know what a comic is? Do you know who is drawing these comics? Like, it seems crazy to me. It's the opposite of what we're here for.
Well, as well as writing comics, this Jack Olek character also wrote novels as well. He wrote, apparently, his most well-known novel was apparently a biography of Messalina from Roman history. That was Claudius's lover, I think, from the Roman Empire.
Okay.
Anyway, that's all the trivia.
Okay, I just want to read one little thing out of Watchmen number 5, which I thought, this was describing Tales of the Black Freighter.
Okay.
So, this is the first issue. And it says, in that first story, 3 men with different paths through life have all been led to the same dockside tavern in search of work. The place is deserted save for a shadowy innkeeper who serves them ale in silence, and the large dark figure of a sea captain who sits at the next table and listens to them recount their stories to each other. The stories are recounted as small, self-contained tales within the larger narrative that frames them, and are all effective if predictable twist-ending yarns that reveal the various tellers to be utterly unprincipled and worthless creatures capable of almost any act of treachery.
Wow.
And I thought, that's supposed to be...
this movie very well,
yes, and it was supposed to be describing a EC Comics knockoff published by DC in a fictional universe.
Yet another Alan Moore metatextual reference.
Yes.
Ding ding. Very good.
Okay, so should we do our ratings?
Yes.
All right, so the comics...
I think it's pretty clear that's a yay.
Yeah, it's a yay.
I love these comics.
It's always hard with an anthology, because you have a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes some are better than others.
But EC Comics generally, I mean...
Yeah,
and a couple of these, but especially the Reflection, the Outsider one, that is really good.
Yeah.
Like, one of the best EC Comics.
Yeah. Yeah,
that I've read.
Would agree with that. I read all the full issues, so I've read like 25 stories or whatever this week, and yeah, they're all really pretty great. Even the stinkers have a lot to. You can always enjoy the artwork anyway. The movie. So I was really up and down on this the whole time, and sometimes while I was watching, I was like, why is everything so brightly lit? Like every story, and then I would be like I got to Peter Cushing, I was like, this is really good, and I get this now. It's like just a British version of the same stories.
Right.
And then I was kind of enjoying it at times, and then other times I was like, this is missing the humor of the EC Comics. But overall, I think I liked it. So I'm going to say yay.
All right. I really like horror anthology movies.
Yes.
Verotica obviously accepted.
yeah.
But again, I'm inclined to agree with you on this. I think this movie had the framing device is a bit silly.
Yes.
It certainly has its moments that I liked.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The Peter Cushing story is pretty good. I like the All Through the House one as well. I thought if they're all going to be like that, I was just going to like this movie, but unfortunately they weren't. I thought the Reflection one was particularly weak.
Yes. I think that one might have diverged the most from the comic.
Oh, there you go.
Maybe.
And now we're prefiguring my answer to the next question as well. I think you're really onto something when you say that we're getting a different interpretation. Perhaps, well, you say more British, but I think they're just playing it a lot more straight. They're just trying to make a horror film.
Well... yes, but I do feel like it was made by somebody who read those comics and really dug them.
True.
I don't think they were like, oh, this is material for a movie. I think somebody read those comics and went, well, these are great comics.
Yes, but he clearly found them more frightening than funny.
Yes.
It's the frightening elements that come through in the film. So I am going to come down on the side of nay.
Okay.
I watched the
That's
Peter Cushing one
totally
online.
fair, and by tomorrow, I mean, while I was watching the movie, I was I was flip-flopping, so, you know, I might change my mind about how I feel about the...
We reserve the right to be utterly inconsistent.
Yes, absolutely.
In our ratings.
How about the adaptation?
Right, well, as I hinted at in my last answer, I don't think this is a particularly effective adaptation. As you say, as you've pointed out, a critical element that's missing is the humour.
Yes.
The humour is not there. And you've convinced me that this is an important part of the comics. I often skip the Crypt Keeper's dialogue at the beginning and the end of the comics when I'm reading them online.
Yeah.
And so they're less important to me, but you've made me realise that I should probably be reading them when I do my next reread.
Yeah.
And I will be. So that element's missing. There are some other ways, you know, like obviously you said the final reflection one is, you know, like that one's diverged pretty... in what is in a comic is really good. Yeah. That second person narration where it's telling you that this is happening to you. Yeah. You are seeing this! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Yep. And we're seeing this creepy first person perspective. He's casting a long shadow. He's looking at people's reactions to him. That translated to a film is not effective. It just... Yeah. It went for
first person in film in general doesn't work. It's rarely been done. And
I agree.
It's maybe really obvious, more obvious even than in the comic that you're trying to hide something.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're not getting a sense that we're really seeing... I know it's his perspective, but it's like you said, it's when we're trying to conceal something from the audience. Yes. It's very obvious. Whereas in the comic, it's more just a stylistic choice. Yeah. Because it's from our point of view. Yeah. Whereas in here, it's like, oh, you know, we're seeing this because we're waiting for some kind of reveal. Yeah. I agree. I agree. So that's a sin. Something that is very effective in the comic, when translated to the film, is not effective at all. And that's a failure of adaptation.
Yes. I also, you know, for me, from the very beginning of this podcast, my question was always, well, what if you have a really interesting art style? What are you going to do on film with that? And here we've got, 10, 15 amazing artists that we're working at AC. And it's like, well, how are we going to, as a filmmaker, how is a filmmaker going to try to approach representing that art style on screen in any way? And there was no attempt. As you said, the novelization speaks to that. It's like the art was ignored. And what is Johnny Craig's art drawing? He drawing those very... those film fatales, and Joan Collins is well cast in that part.
It's a rare film. I think we've covered quite a few films on this podcast now, and it's a rare film that effectively translates the comic aesthetic. Yes. Mostly it's kind of like the comic idea or the story or something like that. We did that 3-week special where we looked at kind of like the aesthetics. But I think, as you say, the humour's been toned down, and in this case, they've gone for, what's attracted them to this form of storytelling. It's the short little vignettes so that they can make an anthology, and the moral comeuppance. Yeah, they've really leaned into. Yes. So they've emphasised that much more heavily. I think partly to make it fit with the weird framing device that they're in hell, but also partly, as you pointed out, to compensate for the fact that there's no humour, and we need something to tie the stories together. Rather than, come look at this creepy shit. Yes. Yes. It's like, come look at these deserving sinners meet their reward. Or punishment, as it were. Yeah. That's no for me.
I think in terms of the humor, I actually think Creepshow is closer to the EC comics, except it's missing the twist ending. I don't think any of those stories had twist. Maybe.
Oh, we can't talk about Creepshow now. Okay. It's not even a comic book movie.
No, that's right. Okay, so...
So, and now, who's next? Perhaps Vault of Horror?
Yes, I think we're a little behind. Here's a little inside baseball. We've rescheduled, shuffled some episodes around, so we're going to end up doing Vault of Horror. We're just going to slide right into it next week. Might as well.
Fantastic.
83 minutes I'm looking at here online. Denham Elliott, Tom Baker.
Tom Baker?
Yeah. 1973, so we're in for an interesting week.
Can't wait to see it.